Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Adam and Eve had 21 sets of twins. They were all paired off into marriage, and then they dispersed throughout the world. And they ended up with developing different languages, developing different cultures, developing different ways of doing things. And Satan was very powerful at that time. And he pushed himself into the midst of all this and created enmity between all of them, created battles between all of them, created difficulties between all of them. And faith was lost. They began to kill other men. Some became cannibals. Some became people who would eat raw flesh. There was lots of degraded action amongst men at that time. They developed different languages and they developed different religions. They began to worship animals and idols, and Allah, God, was forgotten. And God, in order to reestablish his understanding of his presence on earth, sent the prophets to the earth. He sent 124,000 different prophets over time. And the prophets came to reestablish the understanding of the one God and to explain people how to worship that one God and how to understand the difference between right and wrong, to understand what is good behavior, what is bad behavior, what is evil, and what is appropriate. And man began to learn. Some accepted, most did not accept, and continued in the way that they were. Now, many different religions developed out of these prophets, as opposed to understanding the nature of one God and the unity of all mankind, and the fact that they all came from one mother and father. When the prophets came, they each formed an allegiance to that prophet as opposed to God, and a religion started based on the prophet. And again, there were separations, and again, there were difficulties, and again, there was disunity, and again, there was fighting among men. To change this, the prophets continued to come and continued to preach the unity of mankind and the unity of existence, and the fact that there were no separations, there were no differences, that we are all one heart, that we are all in one unified existence. But it was difficult for man to accept this. So orthodoxies were developed. Ways of dress were developed. Ways of growing one's hair was developed. Ways of growing one's beard was developed. And these things became more important than in the understanding of who Allah was. All of a sudden, your dress determined the extent of your religion. Your facial hair determined the extent of your religion. I asked somebody a few weeks ago if their father was religious, and the answer was a believer. And the answer was, well, he has a beard. And that's the answer in much of the world. Do you have a beard or don't you have a beard? Orthodoxy became more about custom and ritual than it became about true worship. But the prophets came and began to teach about what true worship is. And if you look at the various religions, you will see that in each of them, there developed a mystical aspect, an aspect of the religion that placed the worship and the understanding of God above the ritual, that placed the worship and the understanding of God above all the differences between mankind, that placed the worship and loyalty to God above differences, that placed it in a place of unity where they understood the unity of all of existence, where they understood the unity of all mankind, and where they understood that we all came from one mother and father. At the edges of mysticism, these understandings are held by most mystics. We need ourselves to begin to understand this. We have to understand what is important in this world and what is illusory in this world, what is real in this world and what is not real. For starters, we all have bodies, but these bodies are rented. They're not ours. They're rented for a period of time. And when that period of time is over, when that lease is over, the body dissipates and disappears. And then what happens to us is dependent on what it is that we've learned while we've spent our time in this rented body on this earth. What is the objective of man while on this earth? What is it that man is supposed to learn? This is a university for our education. But what is the education that we're supposed to take on? What is the learning that we are supposed to take on? This is at the pivot of the true understanding of what existence is about. And if we don't understand this, then we will live a life of illusion. We will live a life that is outside of the realm of reality, in a hallucination created by ourselves and our forefathers in this world, who had no true knowledge of what this existence is about and passed on that false knowledge to their children and grandchildren and so forth, and it was taken on as if it was truth. In essence, We are here to learn about God and our relationship to God. We are here to learn about our soul and our soul's relationship to God. We are here to learn who we are and what that is in connection to God. Everything else that we learn, everything else that we spend our time with, everything else is part of the illusion of this world. Now, it's very, very difficult for man to concentrate entirely on God. It's very, very difficult for man to give up the worldly pleasures that they've become accustomed to, that they feel are what keeps them going, that they feel are what drives them in this world. But in order to truly find reality, we have to give those things up. We understand, and we've been taught, the kalima, la ilaha illallah, nothing exists but God. As a matter of fact, when I first met Bawa in the infancy of our relationship, he took his finger, I was in his room with my wife and 2 or 3 other people, and he took his finger and wrote on my forehead, La ilaha illallah, so that it was embedded on me and that I would never forget that. But what does it mean that nothing exists but God? Only he, not I. It means that all of creation, everything that we see, everything that we hear, everything that we taste, everything that we smell, everything that we touch, is here to remind us of God's work, is here to remind us of the Creator and our connection to the Creator. Yet, we give it a different meaning. We give it as a gift for our pleasure, a gift for our joy. But in truth, it's here to remind us of who created it. I often tell the story of a dervish walking through a bazaar where vegetables of various kinds were being sold. And there was a watermelon salesman who was screaming at the top of his lungs, the sweetest there is, the sweetest there is, the sweetest there is. And the dervish fainted because he thought people are finally beginning to recognize the reality of God. And it's like that. We need to see the reality of God in everything that we see. We need to see the reality of God in everything that we touch. We need to see the reality of God in everything we hear. We need to understand the fragrance of God in everything that we smell. It's all here to show us the wonder that is God. There is one great wonder in all of existence, and that is God. Yet we separate his creation as if each of it was a separate wonder that somehow needs to be understood and needs to have time spent with it. In truth, all roads lead to Allah. All visions lead to Allah. All sounds lead to Allah. Everything that we encounter sensually leads to Allah. And it's when we understand that we can become real, and we can begin to make a connection to Allah. We have qualities within us. These qualities come out from us and take form, and we worship that form. So, dependent on the qualities that we have in us, that will be the form of our worship. If we have the quality of desire for money within us, then that desire for money will take the form of an idol to worship, and that idol will become money, and we will begin to worship money. We'll begin to worship our bank account. We'll begin to desire others' bank accounts. We'll desire greater and greater wealth, and that will be what our intention is. That will be what we worship. It's the same for power. We can worship power. Power becomes our idol. Power becomes that which it is that we try to obtain. So there's wealth, there's power, there's woman, there's fame, there's political ascent, there's all of these different things in the world that have pull over men, and men are susceptible to. Satan brings these things out, makes them look incredibly valuable, makes them look as if they are necessary for our lives, when in truth, they aren't. When in truth, all that exists for us is our Father. All that exists for us is God and his qualities. And it's only through coming to know God and his qualities that we truly come to know and understand who we are and reality. So we have to develop the qualities that are attached to our Lord. And in developing the qualities that are attached to our Lord, then we begin to worship those qualities. And in worshiping those qualities, we worship him. So if we worship Rahman and Rahim, mercy and compassion, we worship God. God is mercy and compassion. If we worship justice, we worship him. If we worship peace, we worship him. If we worship kindness, we worship him. If we worship love, we worship him, because he is all those things. And if we worship that which he is, then we worship him. And we have to understand the difference between what he is and what his creation is. His creation is the elemental manifest things that he created. So flowers are his creation, and he is the great gardener, the great artist. Animals are his creation. He is the great sculptor who created all of these things, but they are not he. All of the things that are elemental are not he. All of the things that are of elemental form are not he. He is without form. And we have to begin to understand how things can exist without form, and how they, in fact, are more powerful than all of the things with form, and more powerful than all of the abhorrent qualities that belong to Satan. In this world, men believe that they get their power through might. They get their power through arrogance. They get their power through the ability to make others succumb. But The most powerful entity in creation is Allah. And what does he rule with? He rules with mercy and compassion and justice and kindness and love. How many men rule with mercy and compassion, justice and kindness and love? Most men rule through arrogance. They rule through raw power. They rule through lording over other people. They rule through being able to make others submit. They get their power from arrogance. They get their power from worldly things. The drunkard gets his power from liquor. The drug abuser gets his power from drugs. The wife beater gets his power through making others submit to him. These are all abhorrent qualities. These are all qualities that don't belong to purity. They don't belong to reality. They belong to the depths of degradation. So we have to climb from being attached to those powers and those qualities and have our hearts opened up. And in opening our hearts, understand the truth of who our Lord is and understand the truth of his qualities. We somehow have to begin to know what mercy and compassion are, and we have to live mercy and compassion. Mercy and compassion have to run through our being and come out of our being in action in this world. It's not enough to be able to say the words. It's not enough to know that these words exist. His divine qualities are inherently within us. We have to open our heart to find these inherent qualities within us. We have to open our heart to find the purity that is within us. And to find that purity, we have to do away with all of our attachment to the degraded nature of this world and the degraded nature of Satan's qualities and the degraded nature of Satan's influence upon man. Satan is in the business of making the world look as if it were a permanent home, when in truth, it's a temporary resting place. It's a temporary spot that we come to in order to move on to our permanent eternity. And the way that we act within this temporary manifestation, the way that what we accomplish while we are in this rented body is going to determine what happens to us when this rental body is gone. Will we find a place in God's kingdom, or will we be rejected from entering into God's kingdom because of the nature of our being, because of the nature of who we became while we were alive in this world? To understand this, we have to use our analytic wisdom on ourselves. We have to be able to estimate, understand, and conclude how it is we act, what it is that we do. Are we kind? Are we loving? Are we compassionate? Are we merciful? Are we charitable? Do we have gratitude? Or are we self-centered and looking to obtain whatever it is that we can for ourselves to make us greater and greater and greater? In worshiping Allah. Allah is reciprocal towards us. So if we become a slave to God, then God becomes a slave to us. If we think of ourselves as a king, then God becomes a greater king. If we think of ourselves as rising in this world above others, then God rises higher than us. The smaller we become, he becomes smaller than us and becomes our assist and holds us up. The bigger we become, he becomes bigger than us and suppresses us. We need to understand how this mechanism works, and we need to understand how to become humble and small. If we can't become humble, then we can never understand the nature of our Lord and the nature of our relationship with him and the nature of his qualities. Remember, everything he created was to bring us closer to him. All of the prophets were sent so that we could understand how to worship him. And the prophets came with the kalima, the one phrase of worship, which is La ilaha illallah. Nothing exists but God. I do not exist. Only he, not I. Now, if it's only he, not I, then we have to become small. We have to understand how small it is that we need to become. And as we become smaller and smaller and smaller, we become small enough to enter into him and become part of his kingdom, part of his glory, part of his effulgence, part of his grace. This is what is available to us if we allow ourselves to understand truth. But as long as we are attracted to all of the glitters and the fascinations and the magnetisms of the world, as long as we are attracted to illusion, we will never know truth and we will never know reality. It's only when we give up this attachment that we'll come to know who our Lord is, who we are, where our birth came from, and the 18,000 universes. To do this, we have to become small. We have to become a servant to the Most High. We have to become a slave to the Most High. In Arabic, the word ab means slave. And in many names, it is Abdullah, slave of Allah. It is Abd Rahman, the slave of mercy or the slave of compassion. We need to understand our relationship to the Godhead, but becoming a slave is not a subservient role. Becoming a slave is a place of honor. The prophet Muhammad was known as a slave and then as the messenger. He was known as Abd and then the Rasul. So before he could be the Rasul, he needed to be the slave of God, because only the slaves of God have God as their slave. In other words, when you become the slave of God, God begins to help you. God begins to raise you up. As you become subservient to him, he becomes subservient to you in an assist to you. We're here to study the story of our Creator. We're here to understand his story, but instead we are constantly looking into the history of the world, as if the history of the world was what we are about. We study ancient civilizations, we study ancient history, we study modern history, we study European history, we study Asian history, we study North American history, we study the history of different races, we study the history of different languages. We study all of these things, but all of these things are just proofs, just explanations of God's power. And for all of these things, we lose touch with what they're all pointed at. And every one of these things that we see shows us the unlimited power of God, because he created every one of these things. And if we can understand that all of this came through his creation, then we will come and be in awe of him. And as we enter into that state of awe, then we can enter into that state of constant prayer. We have 42,320 breaths a day. With each of these breaths, we should be worshiping God. Now, if God is all that exists, and if we know that as a reality, why are we so entranced by his creation and everything else in this world? Why haven't we understood that to know truth, our focus has to be altered to focus towards him and to let go of everything else? Yet, man worries about his income. Man worries about food on his table. Man worries about his job. Man worries about if he'll get married or not. Man worries about what's going to happen to him next. Well, the truth is, next for everyone is the encounter with his creator at the end of his time. And in that encounter, there will be judgment. And in that judgment, the questions will be asked, what did you spend your time on? What did you spend your time with? What did you give your attention to? What did you give your energy to? What did you give your effort to? Where was your intention? If you can bring yourself to the constant invocation of La ilaha illallah, only he, not I, only he, not I, only he, not I, then your intention will mesh with his intention. And when the time of judgment comes, your intention will mesh with his intention. And if your intention is at one with his intention, then what is there to judge? There's nothing to judge, because there's nothing that exists within you that is other than he. Can we bring ourselves to this place? Can we understand that this is the place that we should be heading towards? Can we understand that this is the culmination of our existence? That this is the truth of our existence, that this is the reality of our existence. But are we afraid to go to that place because we become so comfortable in this false world? And that's what happens to people. They become so comfortable in this false world that they are afraid to give up any part of it. They're afraid to let go of any part of it. Somehow they believe that if they give something up in this world, they will be lacking. I'm not quite sure what they'll be lacking, but they know they'll be lacking. So they hold on tight with both hands, as if this place never ends. But your grip is going to be loosened. You're going to let go, whether you want to or not. And what God has done is he's allowed you to make that decision on your own before he makes it for you. So can we surrender before he makes us surrender? Can we give up this world before he makes us give up this world? Can we on our own turn towards him and surrender to him while still in this rental body? This is the focus that we have to begin to put into action. This is what we need to understand, and this is the analysis we have to do of ourselves. And we have to ask God to forgive us for all of the mistakes that we've made in the past, knowing or unknowing, to forgive us for all of the wrong turns that we've made on this road of our life, and take us on that straight path, which leads towards him, leads towards the understanding of him, leads to the point where we come to know that he is all that exists and that we are part of that. We are part of what he is because he placed within us a soul. And that soul came from who? It came from his ray. It came from his light. And we have to begin to recognize that light as our reality, that ray as our reality. We are not a body with a soul. We are a soul with a body. And we must come to know that soul. And the way we come to know that soul is through constant prayer and to taking on his qualities. There is no other way. You can't grow your hair to know God. You can't shave your hair to know God. You can't wear costumes to know God. To know God, you have to surrender to God, and you have to surrender to his qualities and take on his form, which is formless, which is mercy, which is compassion, which is justice, which is peace, which is kindness. And when you become these things, then everything slowly will become revealed to you. All of the 18,000 universes will be known to you. Your birth will be known to you. Your soul will be known to you, and your connection to your Lord will be known to you. May Allah allow each of us to know that. May he allow each of us to understand that. May he allow each of us to actually do what it is that we were intended to do. May our birthright, which is the right to know our Lord, be what occurs for us. May he take us on that path that opens up the truth for us, and may each of us become that truth. Ameen, ameen. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.